People assume gamification is points, badges, and leaderboards. Why people play games is because of challenge, because of trying things that they wouldn't ordinarily try, eliciting their best performances. Adult learners learn best when they know they don't know something. So if you start out and say, okay, I want you to sell this item to me, go. And then all of a sudden they're in that mode. They have to do it right away. They don't have time to process it. They don't have time to, oh, I'm not a salesperson. Oh, I'm not, they just go. And so that idea of triggering immediate responses is one that gets people a little bit out of their comfort level. Involving your senses by taking actions like making a decision or drawing a card or solving a puzzle in an escape room. It involves more of our senses, more of our body. Humans were meant to use all our senses, right? That's why we have them. And like the sense of touch or the sense of smell or those types of things. Adding those elements of fantasy triggers that sense, like playfulness and curiosity in people, and everybody's the same, and we're all curious or interested in what's going to happen. I would argue that as adults, we kind of have this filter that says, "Oh, well, work. We shouldn't be serious. We shouldn't be." But you have to bring your whole self to work and your whole self to learning. So if we decide to only go after the cognitive self and not engage in play, the opposite of play is depression and not work.
Welcome to Magic Academy podcast. Today with us is Professor Karl.
Great to be here.
So good to have you finally.
Yes, it's been a while. I'm glad we've finally connected.
Yeah, that's beautiful. So for our audience who you may have known him, for those who haven't, Professor Karl is from Commonwealth University, and he is an international expert in gamification and game design. Leverage elements of games and gamifications in a science-based way to empower learning and ultimately transformation. So he has a new book actually coming up, and it's called Action First.
Yeah, ta-da!
Action First Learning. Yeah, ta-da!
Yes.
Perfect. So the goal of today's conversation is to explore on a very fundamental level first, what is game-based learning? And a lot of times when we think about games, it's like leaderboards and rewards and very on like a very surface level. So it would be very curious to know what exactly is gamification on the learning and transformation perspective. And then we'll go into why action first. And then we'll delve deeper into the neuroscience behind why we need to act first before we learn. We will explore virtual reality, the future of learning, and avatars, and AI and coaching. So all that beautiful content in the book. So
yes, very, very robust conversation ahead.
Very robust. Yes, beautiful.
Yeah.
All right, so let's start with the first question, which I just ask every guest. So, beep beep beep. In front of you lands a spaceship, and out walks a very friendly alien. If you were to use one word, one sound, or one movement to invite the alien to play, what would that be?
I would say come forth. Is that 2 words? Does that count?
Sure, we can use a dash to connect to make one.
Come forth, because I think when people come together and make a connection, people or aliens, I think that is the most valuable thing. I think one of the most interesting things to me was when Margaret Mead said, they asked her, I think, when people became civilized, like, what did you look for? And she said, I looked for a mended broken bone. And they said, well, why? And she said, well, because that meant that humankind cared enough about another person who was no longer just bringing food or gathering food, but caring for them. So I think, come forth is an act of caring and an act of showing your kindness and compassion to someone else.
And isn't that true? Because this current world is getting more and more divided, and the critical moment is for us to come back to the basics, is to come reunited, regardless of who you are, where you're from.
Yeah, absolutely. I
Human
mean,
or
there's so
not.
many things that we have in common, much more than we have difference. And I think a lot of forces are trying to highlight the differences and brush over the similarities.
Yes. Focus on the similarities first.
Yes.
Wonderful. So why action first learning? What's so
So
special about action?
yeah, so it came out of a little bit of a frustration. So, if we think about learning environments, an awful lot of times we set the tone with like learning objectives. We set the tone by lecturing to students, or professionals. We set the tone by being very listen to what we have to say. And even though in the back of our minds we know we should do action, we know should we do. So my thought was one day was what when we start that way and then we try to get learners involved, it's really an uphill battle. But I've learned through my 30 plus years of teaching and interacting with folks that if I get them involved early, if they do something early, it sets the tone for the rest of that interaction. And so it came to me like, okay, gamification is good, but sometimes it's done very passively. Like answer this question and get some points, or then get
Mm,
enough points to get on the leaderboard. But it's not really me doing something, making a decision, drawing a card, putting on the goggles, walking into a space I've never been in before, looking for dangers, through VR. So I wanted to express the idea that we want learners right away to do something and to
mm,
take action. And so and there are other terms out there like um, action based learning and activity based learning and things like that. But a lot of them have, I think what happens is they get research around them and they get a certain label. And then people start saying, well, that's not active learning really, and that's really not problem-based learning, and that's not, and then they get into these semantics, and I think the practitioner goes, what am I supposed to do? Like, I don't understand. I just want to help my learners learn. So I said, okay, action first learning, it's not a term that's out there. We're going to use it as an umbrella term, and we're going to use it a little fast and loose because I really want the philosophy to be out there. The philosophy is as soon as a learner enters your learning situation, make them do something. And just like, we did this wonderful ritual today, right? And
yeah, we did a little.
it sets the tone, right? So, and that's why you do that. And that's what I think we need to do from a learning perspective. We need to set the tone so that the learners know what to expect and are performing at a high level in the instructional situation.
That's beautiful. And a lot of times, like you mentioned, when people think about gamification, they it's not necessarily for them to think about action. It's like points and compete. Um, what is on the fundamental level? What is gamified learning? What is the most core elements of games that really contributes to learning? And also when we think about learning, it's not just like learn, it's like change. So we're facilitating um change and transformation change, and it's a skill coming from level one to level two. So
Yes.
it's a biological cognitive embodied change. So
Yes.
how does game elements facilitate that sort of change and micro evolution?
Right. So I think I want to separate gamification a little bit. I think a lot of people assume gamification is points, badges, and leaderboards. And the problem with that is no one plays a game just for points. So if we said, okay, let's play a game, I'll give you 10 points every 5 minutes, it would get very boring. Why people play games is because of challenge, because of pushing themselves to the limit, and because of trying things that they wouldn't ordinarily try, eliciting their best performances. So those aspects, I think, are really what drive people to play games. So if you think about even like a simple game of tic tac toe, I'm trying to do my better performance than you are. I'm trying to figure out and think about the challenges. How can I think differently than you when I put my X or my O down? And how can I do it in a way that's more clever than you? And I win. And you're trying to counter me at every move. So I might say, oh, I'm going to put my X over here. And then you put your O. And I'm like, oh, no, that's not right. Okay, now I have to think differently, right? I've been challenged to think differently. So that's on a very simplistic level. But when we think about human endeavors in general, we're always challenging ourselves. We're always trying to move to the next level. And so when we challenge ourselves and overcome a challenge, that mentally levels us up, which means, oh, I can do that. I've done that. And in fact, there's research that shows that overcoming challenges actually builds confidence. So one of the problems, I think, in a lot of situations is we don't give people challenges that are meaningful enough. And so they're like, yeah, I'm at level 4 already. I'm pretty soon I'll be level 6. No big deal, right?
So what?
Right, exactly. And if the challenge doesn't care, right, it's not hard enough, then the person's not going to care. So good gamification at its fundamental level is creating a situation where you're challenging the learner to overcome something that they can overcome.
I sense a lot of motivation kind of coming because we can, without games, set a little bit like stretch goals and try our best to meet and succeed. However, the gamification comes in to make the process more enjoyable, make
Yes.
the
Yeah.
motivation so much more easier to do and so fun and so and less lonely. So it's
Yes.
not just
Yes.
me and playing this game against myself. Oh, okay, I'm playing this with someone else. I'm not lonely.
Yes.
And also this process is fun. We can do, like you mentioned in your book, like escape rooms and cards, board
Yeah.
games. So it's all like tickling, like we're tickling ourselves
Yes.
as we
Yes,
grow.
and giving yourself a reward for overcoming that challenge. So not just, yes, I overcame the challenge and I gained confidence, but yeah, that's great. Now I'm gonna, go out to dinner with somebody, or I'm going to, or now I'm gonna get a raise, or now I'm going to pursue another job, or now I can, I did the 5K and I did the 10K. Now I can do the half marathon. So those are ways of motivating yourself, as you pointed out, in that pursuit of overcoming challenges. Because if we as humans stop trying to overcome challenges, then we stop growing. And
Hmm.
the alternative to not growing is declining. And so we always need to have these challenges, whether we do it or not. It's so fascinating to me. Somebody will say, oh, this person, they're not really trying very hard in this area, or they're like phoning it in at work or whatever. But if you dig a little deeper, they're perhaps, the dungeon master of their local Dungeons and Dragons, and they're exalted for that, or they're the best crochet person who knows every pattern and can help every. So we all have these areas of expertise or knowledge that we tap into, and then we challenge ourselves. So even if it's not like traditional, like, oh, that person's climbing the corporate ladder, it might be that their challenge every day is to make sure that their lawn is immaculate and they have the rows just right. And I mean, and they're recognized for that, among their peer group.
Yeah, or building a company and overcoming all sorts of challenges
Yes.
to make sure that little baby grow
Yeah.
and become a contributing entity to the world.
Yes. Yes.
That's beautiful. And so coming back to the action now. So with the context of, okay, gaming is about motivation, it's about growth ultimately. So it's helping us to grow in a very pleasant and social way. And so why action should come first? Because I like the word you put first. It's not action based. It's like action first. So there's the preference of sequence here. So neurologically, why would action first really sets it apart from other ways of change?
Right. Yeah. So that's a great question. So the idea behind action first is that it goes back a little bit to Malcolm Knowles, who was an educational. He coined the term andragogy, so adult learning as pedagogy, andragogy, and he said one time that adult learners learn best when they know they don't know something. And so anytime you have an adult learner and you have them in class and say, I'm going to tell you, 5 ways you can be a better salesperson, the adult learner will go, I know 6 ways. This is a waste of my time. So if you start out and say, okay, I want you to sell this item to me, go. And then all of a sudden they have to, they're in that mode. They have to do it right away. They don't have time to
Oh.
process it. They don't have time to, oh, I'm not a salesperson. Oh, I'm not, they just go. And so that idea of triggering immediate responses is one that gets people, one, a little bit out of their comfort level, because when you come to training or you log on to training, you expect, to be spoon fed often. The second thing is that especially in a classroom, it's very social because we can't often solve problems ourselves. The third is it shows you what you don't know. And so if you go, go ahead and sell this, and you're like, oh, well, I don't know how to sell in this situation, or I don't. So all of a sudden the person realizes they don't know something. Now they have this gap. And so they're more open to filling the learning in, involving your senses by taking actions like making a decision or um, drawing a card or solving a puzzle in an escape room involves more than our two senses, right? It involves more of our senses, more of our body. Humans were meant to be very use all our senses, right? That's why we have them. And a lot of learning situations don't leverage all those senses, like the sense of touch or the sense of smell or those types of things. And so I think adding those into the environment is very important. I mean, I used to work in manufacturing, and this woman would always tell me this story about it. She said, I used to work with this one guy, and he mixed up a batch of chemicals, and she would always say, like, and he was the only one that can mix it perfectly. So she said to him one day, like, how do you know how this is mixed? And he goes, well, I go over and I stick my finger in and I go like that, and I can taste whether or not. Now, it probably killed him
What?
eventually, right? But he's like, that's how I know it's a perfect And so he's using his sense of taste. So I'm not saying that we should all sip dangerous chemicals, but the idea that he on the job was using multiple senses, and we on the job typically use, oh, I can hear when my boss is coming because the way she clicks her heels on the floor, or I can smell the perfume, or I can, see the. So those kind of things all go into our making decisions, and so our learning should be like that too. We should be all involved, all in on the learning, and that's what makes it immersive.
And that reminds me because I've been looking into some research about like embodied learning and how our minds actually need our body. And a lot of times, whether we're coaching, whether we are learning something, it's all focused on here. Like we use a lot of visuals and then trying to make our working memory process a lot of information in a very short period of time. We're trying to cut the video short. Yeah, we can go so far only. However, a lot of actually more learning can actually happen in a body.
Muscle memory, right? You think of, I always think of sports stars who, how does that receiver know the ball is behind him, right? And grabs the football and just runs with it, to use like a sports analogy. Or how does the ballerina know where that bar is when she's on the balance bar, right? So all of those are action first. You've got to get on that balance beam. You could study all you want, but you're not going to balance on that beam until you actually get on that beam. And I 100% agree that there is this whole missing part of a lot of our learning designs, and action first learning tries to make up for that.
Yeah, and also game makes up for that because games does not only be here. Games takes hand to play. A play
Exactly.
itself is
Yep.
an
Yep. To
embodied
move the
way of learning.
pieces, to draw the cards. Yeah, absolutely. Yes. Yes. And
That's
there's something
beautiful.
about, you know, tactile learning or experiences that stick with you. If I ask you or anyone, like, what does a playing card feel like? You can picture that. You know what it feels like. And
Mm.
that comes to mind almost right away. So that's the kind of uh, draw, tactile draw that I think can be leveraged for learning.
Well, now I'm curious why the tactile memory tends to be faster to retrieve in our mind. Is there any research supporting that? It's just when we involve our hand, it's easier for
Yeah,
us
that's
to
that's a good
retrieve.
question. I don't know research on that specific area. That would be very interesting. But I do know, uh, for children, they often do the Montessori school, the Montessori method, which is very tactile and hands-on method. I saw a gentleman from Harvard the other day was talking on YouTube about the high percentage of middle school and high school students who are completely disengaged at school because they're not using they're not I think they asked them, like, do you get a chance to think for your own or do your own projects or whatever, and a majority of them said no, we don't. I have to do what everybody else does. And if you think about the overcoming challenge and you think of motivation, me doing what you've told me to do is not as motivational as if you say, okay, I want you to build a castle. How do I do it? I don't care how you do that. You figure out how to build a castle. And then you say, hey, well, wait a minute. I need to know about levers. I need to know about pulleys. And now you're getting that information where if I say, okay, here's how you do it. You stack this on this and use a pulley to do that. It's a completely different experience.
And so I would assume that it's resonating with adults too. So it's actually age agnostic, no matter.
Yes.
So whether it's kids or adult, it's all this
Yeah,
interesting.
I think we like to pretend that adults like are not just big kids, but I think they're just big kids.
I think so. And
Yeah.
I think that's the beauty of it. Like we don't want it to go the other way around. It's the beauty of it is we get the chance to reverse, and then we always see this world from a new perspective, and
Yes.
that gives us new challenges. Because otherwise, I'm done with all the challenges. I'm pretty good. I'm all set. Like nothing to learn.
Yes.
Okay. So what? Okay, then what? That's great. So, and in your books, you've mentioned some games about like board games, escape room games, and then later on the virtual reality and the avatar. Before we venture into the virtual reality avatar and AI coaching, so in terms of like traditional board games or traditional like escape room games, if we were to design a experience, for example, having someone to go through a escape room, um, are there any underlying design principles that an effective escape room can achieve in terms of transformation, change, versus just a typical entertainment escape room experience? What would be the principle that differentiates um, transformational and entertainment kind of?
Right. I think that's a great question. I think the one thing that I talk about with the action first learning model is that no matter what activity you're doing, it ends with reflection. And I think one of the big differences between entertainment activity and a learning activity is the amount of reflection. A typical person who plays an escape room, has an escape room, can, if they sit down and think about it, go, oh, well, I learned this about communication and I learned that about, but typically they would not do that. Action first learning is a specific design that includes that element of reflection. So asking the learner, okay, you were in an escape room and you had trouble with this one puzzle, and somebody else had pieces of it. What prevented you from getting those answers or getting those pieces? And then as they talk through it, then you say, well, how would you then, in a situation with you're working on a team, overcome that similar communication issue? So the idea is to use the experience to encourage, force maybe is a strong word, but that reflection piece, which makes it different than the entertainment piece. And the other thing is that it would be designed with purpose. So, for example, purposefully we'll set up a situation where they have to communicate, and if they don't, there's a breakdown. Oh, okay, we're going to discuss about it. Where in a typical entertainment escape room, it might just be set up that, oh, okay, this looks like an interesting puzzle. Let's put this puzzle in there. Well, it's not enough just to have an interesting puzzle when you want a learning outcome. It needs to be purpose built. And so that's the big difference is we purpose built these experiences so that the learner, if they're really forward thinking can reflect on it, or so we can walk the learner through a reflection that leads to that learning out.
I think the learning outcome, the reflection plus the learning outcome is really the key pieces. And when you're talking about the learning outcome, and when I'm thinking about the escape rooms or the virtual realities or avatars coming next, the narratives, the magic of stories, really kind of can tie things together. And games also is stories. We're exploring and experiencing inside the story. So, what role does a good story play, and what makes a good story that differentiate itself from a learning or transformation based story versus just an entertainment story?
Yes, yes. So that's a great question and a great observation. So the idea, I mean, story is context. So it's the other thing about adult learners is they want to know why they're doing something. So a story provides the context for why are we doing this. And one of the things I think that works well in terms of story is similar situations, case studies, or just describing that to them. We're doing this because we're going to work on communications. And here's a story that's going to help transform the way you communicate with your team, for example. And so when an adult understands, oh, that's why we're doing that. We're not just doing an escape room to do an escape room. We're doing it because we want to reach these outcomes. That can be helpful. And then
Mm.
if you add something like, okay, here's a client that you typically have, and the client's having this problem, you're also going to solve this problem as you communicate as a team. Now you're adding relevance to the situation and you're making it impactful for that learner. The other really interesting thing about stories are and these kind of action first experiences is that people tend not to forget about them. So they'll be talking about them, and I've been in team meetings where somebody said, "Hey, remember when you said this and we had the breakdown? Let's apply that here." And so you get that transfer, I think, a lot more easily because you have this third party event that you can refer to. So you don't say, "Hey, John, you're not communicating." You could say, "Hey, John, remember in the escape room when we had trouble solving that puzzle, and the way we solved it was you wrote everything down first. Like, let's try that here, right?" So you can get that kind of validation of what happens through these stories that are relevant to what's happening on the job. It doesn't have to be a one-to-one. It can be based on a true story, right? It can be an amalgamation of a lot of situations. But if people recognize themselves in those situations, it can be very helpful.
That's great. And when you're talking about the stories, the it just comes to my mind like a basic structure of a story with a beginning and a starts, a middle, and an end, and it's usually like this. So it's like starting, and we're going to climax, and then we solve, and we go out. So does this typical like story
Yeah, I think
screenwriting apply to that
yes.
to
So the
to
one thing I'll add in there, which I tend to think about for learning stories, is a sense of tension. So the tension is the person doesn't know what to do or doesn't know what the right answer is. And so through the story, they find out, learn what they need to do to resolve to get to the denouement or whatever of the story. So the idea is that the story has this little bit of a tension about I don't know what to do exactly and I need to learn what to do in order to get to the ending that's desirable. So that kind of tension, I think, just adds just enough so that the learner goes, ah, yeah. I mean, ideally, the story would always have an aha moment where a person goes, oh, I got it. I was thinking this, but it's really this. Oh, okay. Oh, I was thinking we were communicating, but we really weren't communicating. Okay, I got it. And so those types of moments are what can really lead to the learning. And I think a lot of traditional learning doesn't try to be that. I mean, a lot of traditional learning tries to be so straightforward, like this is the answer, this is what it is, and people get really bored with that. And so if we don't, as designers, start designing that in, then we're going to be replaced by AI because AI can just spit out stuff. But if we add these senses of mysteries, the aha moments, these connections that we didn't know existed, that only humans can connect, then that's when we bring real value and have real change and transformation.
That's beautiful. Adding a sprinkle in a little bit suspense,
Yes.
magical suspense. Where's your suspense? Oh, here you go. Work with AI, figure out some suspenses. Pick one
Right.
out of 100. That's beautiful. So stories, and then that actually ease us into the next topic about virtual reality and AR. And in your book, there's like a few chapters talking about avatar and
Yes.
virtual reality, and I would assume that to be able to invite somebody to fully participate in the stories, we need to give them a body. So they can experience the
Yes.
stories
With legs. That was a
with
mistake
legs.
Horizon made, right? No
And,
legs.
and hand, yes.
Yes. Yes. And then,
So from the science perspective, why virtual reality makes such a big difference? What if virtual reality is a vehicle for learning? What extra speed or what extra spaces that
right.
AI is able to afford that's different than everything else?
So I think one of the main values is the level of immersion. So we talked about before about hearing things. So imagine if you have to train to do safety checks on a platform, oil platform in the middle of the ocean. Very dangerous to do in real life. Very expensive to do that kind of training in real life, etc. But now imagine if you could feel what it's like. You know, the wind in your face. You could hear the sounds. You could smell the ocean. So now all of your senses are keyed to what's happening. You can look around, you can see the top of the tower. So you're immersed in that kind of world and environment. And as you look around, you know that you're there. And there's been instances where people have actually forgotten that they were in a virtual reality. Not for long term, but not like 3 days later. Hey, where am I? But hey,
I
for a
would
couple
probably
of
get
minutes,
dizzy. I was like,
right?
"Aw."
For a couple of minutes there, I thought I was really on the platform, like that kind of experience, and that's a truly immersive experience. I mean, if you think about the best possible training situation is the apprentice and the journeyman, right? And that was probably the best. The problem with that is it's not scalable. Like I can't have we can't have apprentices for every or journeyman for every apprentice. But now you can make the environment virtual reality the journey, right? And now I can learn from that environment. And it can guide me and it can give me extra information. It can warn me of danger. It can allow me to see the consequences of that danger in a safe environment. It can give me cues just like the real environment. And what that does mentally is your mind, if it's a good VR, your mind is there as if it would be in the actual place. And there's been some research about how studies and how simulations, like 20% more confidence, somebody going through the simulation of applying what they know on the job than in the classroom environment. And the reason for that is because the classroom environment is an artificial environment. It's not where I need to apply the knowledge. It's not where I'm going to actually fix the oil rig. I'm going to be out on the oil rig. So if you could put me out on the oil rig and have me fix the oil rig, wow, that's the learning. But uh, previously the technology didn't allow that, but now it does. And so that gives us that sense. And then the other thing that it can do, the virtual reality world, is it can then zoom us in or zoom us out.
Mm.
So now we can see a micro view of molecules or of parts or pieces of equipment, or we can go way up to see the overview of what it looks like. So now we have the ability to see different perspectives at our whim. And that's going to help us solidify, oh, this is where this is in the big picture. This is where this is. We did some training years ago for Kellogg's factory where they made Pop Tarts. And one of the things that we did was during shutdown, we went into the piece of machinery and filmed like how it was spitting out Pop Tarts. And when we did the training, it wasn't VR at the time, but when we did the training, somebody said, I never knew what went on inside that machine. I had no idea how it operated. So now think of a VR environment where you can zoom into the machine and see exactly how it
Mm.
functions. So that's going to inform you when you go to troubleshoots, when you go to put in product, when you go to take out product. Now you know how it works. And that's missing in a lot of areas, and VR can allow that to happen.
It brings us a lot of contextual informations that's historically been missing through other mediums, a classroom, a video, or an article, or blog, or even like a video game. Uh, I mean, sometimes video games can be VR too.
Yes.
So what so the example that you shared is more of a realistic one, like high stake, high danger kind of space. If you conduct training, it's safe to be in that environment. What if it's like in a fictional, a story based environment? How would a virtual story based experience differ than, say, a board game
Yeah,
with
yeah.
a
So,
story?
so yes. So let me give you an example of there was a researcher years ago in a virtual environment, Second Life, and she had her students not all at the same time, but dress up as the Kool Aid Man. You know, the big Kool Aid. Hey,
Oh,
Kool Aid, and go to a nightclub in Second Life. And
cool.
yes, exactly. And so what happened was at first
Wait,
everybody's
are
like, "Oh,
they
that's
18
cool."
plus?
Right.
I guess not. It's okay.
Yeah,
No
people may
alcohol
not.
is
You might
involved.
have to
That's okay.
Google. Some people might have to Google Kool Aid Man. But
Okay,
when
that's
Kool
actually
Aid Man went
21st,
to
21.
right, when Kool Aid Man went to the nightclub, it was very interesting because at first people are like, "Yeah, that's funny, Kool Aid Man." Then Kool Aid Man starts dancing and bumping into people, and then people started shunning Kool Aid Man and not wanting Kool Aid Man to come in. Wouldn't let Kool Aid Man come back to the nightclub. Started discriminating against Kool Aid Man. So if you wanted to experience a high level of discrimination, it'd be very hard to do that like in real life without being in some kind of danger or people picking on you or whatever. But virtually, they could experience that in a real discrimination, but in a safe environment because it was virtual and they were just as a Kool Aid Man. So that is one way where you can kind of conceptually do that. Another way to do that is some people have, with the story. One of the things that we forget is stories are fiction is a way of teaching us using our imagination. And so if we create a story in this virtual environment, we can allow a person to expand their imagination and you lose your defenses. So, for example, if I said to you, "Oh, you're a manager and you work at a bank. You're a manager at a bank, and this happens," you might go, "Huh, that never happens to me at the bank. I'd never do that." But if you said, okay, you're a manager on a spaceship flying to Mars, that suspended disbelief is like, okay, now what do I need to do? Right? All of a sudden, you assume this role that you don't have any baggage for. And you start doing actions as if you would, as if you were a bank manager, but you're doing actions as if you're a space manager and you're trying to figure out what happened. And so there's research actually very clear about this that it allows people to actually escape some of their assumptions and preformed habits because now they're in this brand new environment. And there's some research also that shows that kids actually learn fantasy environments more effectively than they do kind of in real environments, like the fantasy words. And the researchers' belief is because like I don't encounter the word orc all the time, so I have to figure out what is orc, how do I study it, what is a goblin? I don't know goblin all the time. I got to figure out what it is. What's a Death Eater? So they spend more time learning these terms and terminology than maybe things that, yeah, I know what a coupon is. I know what a ratio is, whatever. So they put actually more effort into learning it, which is really kind of interesting. And again, I would possibly, so do adults. I mean, look at the adult fan clubs there's adults that speak Klingon. It's not even a real language and people speak it. uh,
Klingon.
Klingon, right? So why do they do that? Well, because they're invested in that fantasy and that environment, and that's um, meaningful to them. And so when we think about creating fantasy environments for learning, it can be very meaningful.
And I think you brought a very interesting topic about like the kid, like, so the kids learn, they invest more time, their motivation is much higher in a story like space than for adults. So this kind of kid-like, childlike state, would you safely hypothesize, or maybe there's a research showing that regardless of your age, if we are being put in a environment that's so far away from our familiar spaces, adding a little bit narratives and fantasy and interesting suspenses inside a story far away from planet Earth, would that type of environment tend to trigger a childlike sense of wonder, the motivation to explore from ground zero to
I think so.
multiple
I don't know
dimensions?
of exact research, but I do through observation and through looking at some research in very narrow areas. It seems like the idea of fantasy evokes a sense of curiosity, the sense of exploration, wonderment, newness. Humans definitely like newness. So we seek things that are new or different. Our minds have been pretty much programmed. Like, I kind of say to people, have you ever driven home and not even remember driving home, right? Because it's so familiar to you. Um, but that one thing that was different kind of stands out all the time. So, but we're attuned to looking for things that are different because, as we were in our primitive form, that it could kill us. Now it probably can unless it's like a meteor from the sky or something. But the idea is that we actually are attuned to new, different things, curiosity, and we want to experience things that we don't experience all the time. That's why people travel, right? Because they want to experience a new country and they want, so so
Shift context.
right, yes, exactly. And if you think about work and there's no shift in context for forever for training or for whatever, then people aren't going to be as attuned. So adding those elements of fantasy triggers that sense, like playfulness and curiosity in people, and everybody's the same, and so we're all curious or interested in what's going to happen. I would argue that as adults, we kind of have this filter that says, oh, well, work, we shouldn't be serious. We shouldn't be, but you have to bring your whole self to work and your whole self to learning. So if we decide to only go after the cognitive self and not engage in play, like someone said, the opposite of work is not play. The opposite of play is depression and not work. So we don't want to have a whole group of people that are depressed, that are not having fun, that are not enjoying themselves. You're not going to get the highest productivity that way. And so training, while it can't change all corporate culture, can add those elements in it where other, like accounting's not going to do that, right? Marketing's not going to do that. Who's going to do that? Training and development, learning and
That's beautiful. Is fantasy a a major genre kind of narratives that creates the most childlike wonder state, or are there other kind of types of narratives that also tends to trigger
I don't know if
similar
it creates
levels
the
of curiosity?
most childlike state. That's a good question, but it does definitely trigger that. But I have a colleague. He works with Lego, and he always says, he'll take chief executives and sit them down with Lego brick, and they're like different people. And he says, we're going to use Lego brick to visualize the problems that your company's having, right? And they do that, and it's just that combination of play, a tactile, I think a little bit of a nostalgia, and that gives them that experience. So there's lots of different tools that we who work in human development can bring to the table that other people don't necessarily think about or think initially might be childish, but then when they get into it, they're like, oh, this is really interesting. I mean, creativity comes from play. Innovation comes from play. Children learn from play. So, for example, kids go to school all day and they may complain about school, like at fifth grade or whatever, or 5 years old, I hate school. But what do when they have their friends over? They play school. I'll be the teacher, you be the student, right? And they go through that process, and then they play as they go along different roles. And then adults do it as cosplay, right? Now it's acceptable to dress up like your favorite superhero. So the idea is that we never really lose that wanting to role play or see what it's like to be somebody else, or involve that in fiction. I mean, fiction is entering a world where you're somebody else, or you get to know somebody, like you get to know a spy that you would never know, or you get to know an alien that you would never know. So all of that, and then it also stretches your imagination. So, for example, the very first, this is a little, I don't want to get too dark, but people were saying, "Hey, I could never imagine that terrorists would fly planes uh, into the World Trade Center." Right? It never. But actually, years before in fiction, they described that very scenario. So what play does is gives you the permission to think the unthinkable, and then you can now counter the unthinkable, or you can implement what was previously unthinkable in a negative way, but also in a positive way, right? You can say, hey, what if our company did that? Okay. And so I think fiction, play, and creativity are all wrapped together to help us move to the next level, whatever that happens to be.
In a gamified environment.
Unified environment,
The
yes.
ticklings. That's great. Oh my god, we're reaching a full kind of circle
Yes,
now.
we are.
Before we conclude, I know people are interested in like AI and coaching, and also in the previous kind of the conversations that you're talking about Montessori and one-on-one apprentice and the coach. And so how can AI play a role, maybe through avatar, to really help people, guide people one-on-one at scale in a gamified fantasy
Yes, yeah.
environment toward their transformation?
Yeah. So, I think there's a lot of possibilities. So, for example, let's say that, like, I set up a chatbot actually to do sales coaching, uh, but in the form of Dungeons and Dragons. So I said, okay, this is the environment that you're in, and you have to sell things in this world, and you're selling gems. And so then the chatbot interacts with me and asks me questions, and I ask it questions as if I was trying to sell it the gems, and it gives me feedback. And I use the spin model for sales, so it actually knows the model. And then at the end, because it's AI and recording everything I do, I say, okay, now give me um, uh, an assessment of how I did with my selling skills selling this particular gem. So it can give me that kind of feedback and information. So there's a lot to set it up, and it's still, AI is not 100% right now. It still hallucinates and still does things. You're like, what is that? But if you look at
It's
the
coming from
potential,
the database that I provided you.
yes. So if you think about what is potential and testing out now, AI can be that um, third party objective voice, but it can also do that in a really fun way. I did a presentation one time for a group, and I had AI chatbot as my co-presenter, and her name was Jane, after Jane Goodall, taking care of the apes. And I ran through a practice session, and one of the sponsors of the event said, "Wow, I thought that would be funnier." And I'm like, "Oh, interesting." So I'm like, "Okay." I went back and I said, "Okay, AI chatbot, I want you to have the personality of Robin Williams, Stephen Wright, and a little bit of Ellen DeGeneres thrown in there." And so then the chatbot came back with jokes and with quips, and it was much more lively interaction that I had with this chatbot because I gave it a personality. And so when you add a game world and give the chatbot a personality, now you're interacting with an entity that is multi-dimensional rather than just one dimensional, right? So just like action-based learning, right? Instead of just saying, okay, you're going to be a content expert in this area. Yeah, you're a content expert, but you're also a comedian. You also have this backstory. You also do this, and every once in a while throw out this piece of information. And now you're dealing with an entity that's multifaceted. And that's much more interesting than a one-dimensional situation. Then you throw games into it, and now it's doing some game stuff as well. And now you're firing on many cylinders.
That's beautiful. It's also when we talk about multidimensional, it's like sometimes we don't know, sometimes we think we know, but we're wrong. So it's like the suspense is coming back not only through the narratives, but also through the characters
Yes,
empowered by
yes,
the AI.
yeah,
That's great.
and you get to know the character. So there's a sense of familiarity. We also like familiarity, and so that gives us that
Mm.
sense as well.
Continue. Ah, so okay. So a coherence, even though
Yes.
there's our different dimensions. Great. Wow. I feel like we talked through the books. Are we missing any
Yeah,
key
we
points?
a lot of it. Yes, yes,
Great. So
yeah,
there's a lot
me
of more
too.
details for our audience to dig deeper and to create this um, purposeful, reflective spaces as we touch the books
Yeah, yeah. The book
and
does
flip
one of the
through the
things
pages.
that I like about the book is that it. I've written a number of books, and so every time I write a book, somebody will say, "Oh, it was a great book, but it had no case studies," or somebody said, "It was a great book, but there was no step-by-step instruction." It was a great book, but it had nothing about how to do this in AI. So I've added all that into the book. So it has case studies, it has step-by-step instruction, it has some AI assists to help people when to use it. It contrasts one with the other, so it's not just combination of learning, but it's also learning about how to put valuable information into a book. So it's been a kind of a really great experience that way as well.
That's beautiful. My goodness. Oh, so as before we conclude this conversation, I would like to kind of wrap it with a magic question.
Okay.
Um, when you were little, 5 years old, 11 years old, 16 years old, what did you enjoy creating so much that time just disappeared for you?
Yeah, oh, that's a great question. So the thing that I enjoyed when I was younger, one of the things that we would do, I grew up on a large tract, like 24 acres of land, and I would go out in the woods and we would build these lean-tos. We thought they were elaborate forts, but they were just basically lean-tos with some sticks. Looking back at it, but we would spend literally hours, and my mom and dad would be like, they had a dinner bell, and we would go out in the morning. And we would be in the woods, we'd be making these forts and everything, and then all of a sudden the dinner bell rang, and we would come home for dinner. So I had a really great time out doing that kind of creating. Again, we thought they were great big forts, but just basically creating little lean-tos and finding sticks for them and putting leaves on top of them, and setting up this little like camp. It was a lot of fun.
It's very beautiful. And then once you build it, you can come back and have a real camp, like chill out,
Yes, yeah. We never seemed to
campfire,
get
s'more.
like the finished product that we wanted. A storm would come, or we weren't the best builders,
Mm.
so sometimes it would fall down. But every once in a while, we came and we hung out, and our friends would you know, hang out there, and then we would, build a different one somewhere else. Yeah, it was really just being out in the woods and doing that rough building was very fun.
That's beautiful. I just wish as we become adults and still get to do things like that in the
Yeah,
real world or in the virtual world, maybe motivated by a story, action first.
yeah,
So last question, I
sure.
promise. What would be one simple practice that you practice to keep your wonder alive, um, regardless of all the other contexts? Just keep that wonder alive.
Yeah,
How do you do that?
that's a
Something
great question.
simple.
I think well, it's two things: knowing that there's always more to learn. And so I guess being a faculty member, that's kind of naturally
Oh,
that's your job, right? That's what I need to do. But I really love learning about new things and finding out. So, you know, 10 years ago, AI wasn't on my radar at all. And just a few years ago, someone said, check out this AI. Oh, what is this AI? Oh my goodness, this is this AI thing. That's really cool. Or game-based learning wasn't really on my radar. And someone said, hey, we can learn through games. And, oh yeah, that's fantastic. The other thing is resilience, because a lot of times, especially with games and gamification, a lot of people were like, nah, that's people are too serious. That's not going to work. Don't do that. I have a card game called Zombie Sales Apocalypse. People are like, corporate, they're never going to go for zombie. Don't call it that. So just exploring the wonderment, like
startups might.
Yeah. They might, exactly. So anyway, so just kind of keep that sense of there's always something new to learn, and just give it a shot and see what happens. A lot of people say, a lot of times I think people say, well, they always go through like the worst case scenario. Like, what if I do 6 hours and I don't learn this or whatever? I always try to think of the best. Like, what if I do learn this? Like, what's that gonna mean? What am I gonna be able to do with this? Like, let's figure that out first, and then figure out, how to learn it. So that would be a thought I would have in that area.
That's beautiful. It's always staying curious.
Stay curious.
Always ready to learn, to expand, because we are always a work in progress.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you, Professor Karl, for coming by and sharing your upcoming book with us, and sharing us about what you have learned in terms of embodied learning, the importance of action just to get doing, and the fundamentals of gamification, where it's going beyond leaderboards or points, or even competition. It's more like tickles for us to continuously grow, provide us motivations and why and context and stories for us to continuously grow and expand. And we also looked into the role virtual reality play, and how we can, through an avatar, give us hand and legs so we can have agencies in the virtual world. Yes. And how AI can potentially help us to receive guidance one-on-one, and also how the AI can play a role in a character in the story, and within the coherence at the core, giving us this multidimensional experiences, interacting with that character in the story.
Wow, what a wonderful summary of our entire conversation. You did a great job. Thank you.
You're welcome. My pleasure. and thank you so much for sharing that. And let's hope for our audiences, if you're interested, all the information about Kyle, his LinkedIn, and the link for the new book is in the show note below. So we encourage you to keep doing your research, learning more about it, and get connected. And that's how we grow the magical communities. And let's stay magical together.